The sand burned like hellfire beneath her feet, but Josephine Gallagher refused to stop moving because stopping meant dying under the New Mexico sun. She had been walking for nearly 2 days, her shoes abandoned 10 miles back when the leather had split apart and become more torture device than protection, leaving her to cross the scorching Chihuahuan desert with nothing but torn stockings that disintegrated within the first hour. Behind her lay the smoking ruins of the wagon train that had been attacked by outlaws 3 nights prior, and ahead lay only the shimmering hope that someone, anyone, might find her before the desert claimed what the bullets had not. Each step sent jolts of agony through her blistered feet, but she pushed forward, her once fine traveling dress now shredded and caked with dust and dried blood, though thankfully none of it her own. The water had run out yesterday morning, and her tongue felt like a strip of leather nailed to the roof of her mouth. She had watched her older sister Clara die in the attack, had seen her father take a bullet defending the women and children, had witnessed everything she knew turn to ash and screaming in the span of 20 terrible minutes. The only reason she still lived was because she had hidden beneath her mother's body until the shooting stopped, then crawled away in the darkness while the outlaws drank themselves stupid on stolen whiskey. The year was 1881, and women did not survive alone in the territories, but Josephine discovered she had more grit than she ever imagined when death became the only alternative. She had been heading to Raton with her family, where her father had purchased a mercantile and promised them a new life away from the overcrowded streets of St. Louis. Now that dream lay buried in the desert along with everyone she loved, and all she could do was place one torn foot in front of the other, following the wagon tracks that she prayed led somewhere civilized. The sun climbed higher, turning the world into a furnace, and twice she stumbled and fell, tearing her palms on the rough ground. The second time she almost stayed down, almost let the desert have her, but somewhere deep inside burned a stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. She thought of her sister's last words, telling her to run, to live, to not let those men win by dying here in the dust. So she stood, swaying like a willow in a storm, and kept walking. By the time the sun began its descent on the second day, Josephine could no longer feel her feet, which she supposed was a mercy. Her vision swam with dark spots, and she knew with grim certainty that she would not see another sunrise. The thought brought neither fear nor sadness, only a distant regret for all the things she would never experience. She was 22 years old and had never been properly kissed, had never fallen in love, had never danced at her own wedding or held her own child. Those possibilities were dying with her, one agonizing step at a time. She crested a small rise and saw him in the valley below, a figure on horseback that shimmered in the heat haze like a mirage. She tried to call out, but her throat produced only a ragged croak. Her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the burning sand, unable to take another step. If he was real, he would find her. If he was a hallucination, then at least her suffering would end soon. She closed her eyes and felt consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. Ethan Garrett had been tracking the outlaws for 3 days when he spotted something on the ridge that made him rein in his horse. At first he thought it might be a coyote, but coyotes did not wear blue dresses, and they certainly did not move with the desperate determination of someone fighting for their life. He spurred his mount forward, covering the distance quickly, and his stomach dropped when he saw it was a woman, collapsed and motionless on the desert floor. He dismounted in a fluid motion born of years in the saddle and dropped to his knees beside her, his weathered hands checking for a pulse. It was there, thready and weak, but present. Her face was burned red by the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding, and when he lifted her slightly, he saw her feet and cursed under his breath. They were shredded, bloody, covered in blisters and cuts that must have caused unimaginable pain. Yet she had walked, probably for miles, probably knowing she would die but refusing to surrender. He grabbed his canteen and carefully tilted her head back, dribbling water onto her lips. She did not respond at first, and he feared he had found her too late. But then her tongue moved, catching the moisture, and her eyes fluttered open. They were green, he noted absently, the color of new grass after spring rain, and filled with a confusion that quickly sharpened into awareness. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from days in the saddle. "You are safe. Drink slowly." She gulped at the water desperately, and he had to pull the canteen away to keep her from making herself sick. "Not too fast. Your body needs time." "More," she whispered, the single word clearly costing her dearly. "In a moment." He pulled off his neckerchief and wet it, dabbing at her face and neck. The cool water on her burned skin made her gasp. "How long have you been walking?" "2 days. Maybe lost count." Her eyes focused on him with startling intensity. "Who are you?" "Ethan Garrett. I am a deputy out of Raton. Been tracking the Miller gang." He studied her face. "I found the wagon train yesterday. Counted 12 dead. You run from there." She closed her eyes and he saw tears track through the dust on her cheeks. 15 dead. 3 of the men were out hunting when it happened. They probably found the bodies by now. 15. God in heaven. "What is your name?" Josephine Gallagher." She opened her eyes again. "My whole family is gone. Everyone." He had seen plenty of death in his 30 years, more than his share since pinning on the deputy's badge, but something about this woman's situation hit him hard in the chest. She had walked 40 miles across the desert barefoot, refusing to die, carrying nothing but grief and determination. Most men would not have lasted half that distance. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I do not think I can even stand." "Then I will help you." He retrieved his saddlebag and pulled out a spare shirt, tearing it into strips. Her feet needed proper doctoring, but he could at least wrap them for the journey. When he touched the first foot, she bit back a cry, and he worked as gently as possible, cleaning the worst of the dirt and blood before wrapping the makeshift bandages. By the time he finished, she was breathing hard, her jaw clenched against the pain. "I am sorry," he said. "I know it hurts." Better than being dead. He found himself almost smiling at that. Fair point. He pulled off his boots, worn but still serviceable leather that had carried him across half of New Mexico. "Here, they will be too big but better than nothing." She stared at the boots like he was offering her a fortune. "You cannot give me your boots. You need them." "I have another pair in my saddlebag. These are my spares." It was a lie, but a necessary one. He would ride in his socks if it meant keeping her feet protected. "Besides, you walked 40 miles barefoot. Least I can do is give you something to wear for the ride back." The boots swallowed her feet, comically large, but when she tried to stand with his help, she did not immediately collapse, which he counted as progress. Getting her onto his horse proved more challenging. She had no strength left, and he finally just lifted her bodily and settled her in the saddle, then swung up behind her. She swayed immediately, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her steady. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed. "It is about 15 miles to Raton. Can you make it?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." "Then I suppose I will make it." He clicked his tongue and the horse started forward at a walk. Behind them, the sun continued its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Josephine slumped against him, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of exhausted sleep. He shifted slightly to support her better, and tried not to think about how natural it felt to have her weight against his chest. Ethan Garrett had been alone for a long time by choice. He had loved once, back when he was 23, but Sarah had died of cholera before they could marry, and he had decided that caring for people only led to heartbreak. He had worn the badge for 7 years, drifting from one town to another, never staying long enough to put down roots. He told himself he preferred it that way, that loneliness was better than loss. But holding this broken, determined woman as his horse carried them through the desert twilight, he felt something shift inside him, like a door he had nailed shut was beginning to crack open. They reached Raton after midnight, the town dark except for the saloons and the boarding house where Ethan kept a room. Josephine had woken twice during the ride, each time disoriented and frightened until she remembered where she was. Now she dozed fitfully, her head heavy against his shoulder, and he hated to wake her but knew she needed proper medical attention. "Josephine," he said quietly, "we are here." She stirred, lifting her head slowly. "Already? You slept most of the way." He dismounted first, then reached up to lift her down. She weighed almost nothing, and he wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. "The doctor lives above his office. I will take you there." "I have no money," she said, her voice small. "Everything burned with the wagons." "Do not worry about money right now." He carried her through the dark streets, her arms wrapped around his neck, and kicked at the door of Doc Morrison's office until a light appeared in the upstairs window. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s who had seen everything the frontier could dish out, took one look at Josephine and ushered them inside without questions. "Put her on the table," Morrison said, lighting lamps. "What happened?" "Walked barefoot across 40 miles of desert after her wagon train got hit by outlaws," Ethan said, settling Josephine onto the examination table. She winced but did not cry out. Morrison let out a low whistle. 40 miles, in this heat. He began unwrapping the makeshift bandages from her feet. "Girl, you are either the luckiest or the toughest person I have ever treated, and I have not decided which." "Probably both," Josephine said, managing a weak smile. The doctor worked in silence for several minutes, cleaning and examining her feet while she gripped the edge of the table hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Finally, he straightened, shaking his head. "You have got serious burns, dozens of cuts, and some deep blisters that are already infected. Going to hurt like hell for a while, and you will not be walking properly for at least a month, maybe 2. But you will heal. You are young and strong, and you got lucky that Deputy Garrett found you when he did. Another few hours and we would be having a different conversation." "Thank you," she whispered. Morrison applied salve and clean bandages, then gave Ethan a bottle of laudanum. "She needs rest, food, and water. Keep those feet elevated and change the dressings twice a day. And for God's sake, do not let her walk on them for at least 2 weeks." "Where should I take her?" Ethan asked. The boarding house where he lived did not rent to unmarried women, and the only hotel in town was not the kind of place a respectable woman should stay. Morrison rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "My wife can look after her if she is willing. We have got a spare room upstairs. Martha has been wanting someone to fuss over since our daughter moved to Denver." Josephine looked between them, clearly overwhelmed. "I cannot impose like that. You have already done so much." "Nonsense," Morrison said briskly. "You need care, and my wife will enjoy having another woman in the house. It is settled. Ethan, help me get her upstairs." Martha Morrison turned out to be a plump, practical woman who took one look at Josephine and immediately went into mothering mode. Within an hour, the younger woman had been bathed, dressed in a clean nightgown, fed warm broth, and tucked into a soft bed. Ethan watched from the doorway as Martha fussed over her patient, and something in his chest tightened at the sight of Josephine's exhausted but grateful smile. "You should go home and get some rest yourself," Morrison told him quietly. "You look like you have been rode hard and put away wet." "I need to report to Sheriff Dalton about the wagon train," Ethan said. "And I still have not caught the Miller gang. That can wait until morning. Go sleep." But Ethan found sleep elusive. He lay on his narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, seeing Josephine's face every time he closed his eyes. He had carried plenty of people to the doctor over the years, victims of violence and accident and misfortune. None of them had affected him like this. Maybe it was the sheer determination she had shown, walking until her body gave out rather than surrendering to death. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes when she looked at him, trusting him to help when she had every reason to trust no one. Or maybe it was simply that he had been alone too long, and his heart had decided now was the time to remind him what it felt like to care about someone. He rose before dawn and went to the sheriff's office, writing up his report on the wagon train massacre. Sheriff Tom Dalton, a weathered man in his 50s who had been keeping law in Raton since it was barely more than a tent city, read through it with a grim expression. 15 dead, Dalton said heavily. And only one survivor. That is the Miller gang style, all right. Brutal and thorough. He looked up at Ethan. "You say this girl walked 40 miles. Near enough. I found her about 15 miles out, but based on where the wagon train was hit, she covered at least 40 barefoot. Tough as nails, then. She remember anything useful about the attack?" I did not question her. "She was half dead when I found her, and the doc says she needs rest." Dalton nodded. "I will want to talk to her eventually, but it can wait a few days. In the meantime, I am putting a bounty on the Miller gang, $500 for the lot of them, dead or alive." He paused. "You planning to go after them?" Ethan had been thinking about little else. "They are probably halfway to Mexico by now. Probably. But if anyone can track them, it is you. Question is, do you want to?" It was a fair question. Ethan had been a deputy for 7 years, but he had never been particularly driven by justice or revenge. He did the job because it needed doing and because he was good at it, not because he felt any particular calling. But the thought of the men who had killed Josephine's family riding free made something hot and ugly coil in his gut. "I will think on it," he said finally. After leaving the sheriff's office, he found himself walking to the doctor's house. Martha answered his knock, smiling warmly. "Deputy Garrett, come to check on our patient, if she is awake. She is, and eating breakfast like she has not seen food in a week. Come on up." Josephine was sitting up in bed, a tray across her lap, working her way through eggs and biscuits with single-minded focus. She looked better already, the color returning to her face, though her hair was a wild tangle of brown curls that Martha had not yet managed to tame. She looked up when he entered and set down her fork. "Deputy Garrett," she said, and he noticed she had a slight rasp to her voice that had not been there yesterday. "I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life." "You saved your own life," he corrected, leaning against the doorframe. "I just gave you some water and boots." "Which is what I needed to survive." She studied him openly, and he found himself shifting under the intensity of her gaze. "Why were you out there? You said you were tracking outlaws." He explained about the Miller gang, about following their trail for 3 days, about finding the destroyed wagon train and then her. As he spoke, he watched her face, seeing the grief that flickered across her features when he mentioned the bodies they had buried. "They took everything," she said quietly when he finished. "All the money my father had saved, our possessions, even my mother's wedding ring. They laughed while they did it. You saw them. I was hiding, under my mother's body." She said it matter-of-factly, but he saw her hands tremble on the blanket. There were 6 of them. The one in charge had a scar across his face from his eye to his chin. He was the one who shot my father, Carson Miller. Ethan had never seen the man personally, but the description matched what he had heard. Did you recognize any of the others? One of them called another one Virgil. That is all I remember for names. Virgil Stokes, probably. He was Miller's right-hand man, known for being as cruel as he was stupid. Ethan committed the information to memory. That is helpful. If you remember anything else, let me know. You are going after them. It was not a question, but he answered anyway. I am thinking about it. Do not get yourself killed on my account. I have seen enough death. Something in the way she said it, flat and tired, made him cross the room and sit in the chair beside the bed. I have been chasing bad men for 7 years. I am pretty good at not getting killed. Everyone thinks that until they are wrong. She had a point, but he did not want to think about his own mortality right then. How are your feet? Terrible, but Dr. Morrison says they will heal. She looked down at her hands. I have nothing, you know, no family, no money, no possessions. I do not even know what I am supposed to do now. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that she would figure things out, but empty platitudes would not help. One thing at a time. First you heal, then we worry about the rest. Is that how you live? One thing at a time. It is the only way I know how. She met his eyes, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. He saw intelligence in her gaze and strength, and a deep well of sadness that he recognized because he carried his own. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. Deputy Garrett, Martha called from downstairs. There is someone here to see you. He stood reluctantly. I should go. You need to rest. Will you come back? The question came out quickly, almost before she could stop it, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. I mean to give Sheriff Dalton my statement about the gang. Yeah, he said, allowing himself a small smile. I will come back. Over the next week, Ethan visited Josephine every day, telling himself it was official business but knowing he was lying. Sheriff Dalton had taken her statement on the second day, thanked her, and told Ethan there was no reason to keep bothering the girl. But Ethan kept finding excuses to stop by the Morrison house, bringing her books from the general store, checking on her recovery, sitting in the chair beside her bed while they talked about everything and nothing. He learned that she had been raised in St. Louis, the daughter of a successful banker who had dreamed of owning his own business out west. She had been educated at a private school for girls, spoke passable French, and could play the piano, though she admitted she was not very good at it. She loved reading, especially adventure stories, and had a sharp wit that caught him off guard more than once. Before the attack, she had been excited about the move to Raton, looking forward to the freedom of frontier life after the stuffy constraints of St. Louis society. She learned that he had been born in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys, and had left home at 16 to make his own way. He had worked as a ranch hand, a scout for the cavalry, and a deputy in 3 different territories. He had no living family that he knew of, his parents dead and his brothers scattered to the winds. He had been engaged once but did not talk about it, and she was perceptive enough not to push. He liked his coffee black, could track a mouse across solid rock, and had once won $50 in a poker game only to lose it all the same night betting on a horse race. They talked about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they carried. She admitted she had always wanted to see the ocean, and he told her about the time he had made it all the way to California and stood on the beach watching the waves roll in. She asked if it was as beautiful as people said, and he told her it was more beautiful, that pictures and words could not capture the vastness of it. She said she hoped to see it someday, and he found himself thinking he would like to show it to her. Martha Morrison watched their growing friendship with knowing eyes but said nothing. And Doc Morrison just shook his head and muttered about young people when Ethan showed up for the 6th day in a row. Josephine's feet were healing slowly, the angry red of infection fading to pink, and by the end of the first week she could wiggle her toes without gasping in pain. On the 8th day, Sheriff Dalton called Ethan into his office and got straight to the point. "You planning to go after the Miller gang or not? Because if you are not interested, I need to send someone else." Ethan had been avoiding this decision, but he could not put it off forever. "If I go, I will be gone for weeks, maybe a month, I am aware. Question is, are you willing?" He thought about Carson Miller, laughing while he murdered innocent people. He thought about Josephine's family, buried in unmarked graves in the desert. He thought about justice and duty, and all the reasons he had pinned on a badge in the first place. But mostly he thought about the way Josephine smiled when he walked into her room, the way her whole face lit up like he was the best part of her day. He thought about the conversations they shared, the comfortable silences, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth staying in one place for. "No," he said finally. "I am not willing. Send someone else." Dalton raised his eyebrows. "This about the Gallagher girl, maybe?" "Probably. Yeah. Ethan, you have been a good deputy, one of the best I have worked with, but I need to know you are committed to the job, not distracted by a pretty face." It was a fair criticism, and Ethan could not even argue with it. "Then maybe it is time I gave back the badge." Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You are serious?" "I have been drifting for 7 years, Tom, moving from town to town, chasing outlaws, never letting myself care about anything or anyone. I am tired of it. Tired of being alone, tired of watching people die, tired of sleeping with one eye open." He pulled the deputy's badge from his vest and set it on the desk. "I want to stay in Raton, find some regular work, see where things go with Josephine if she is interested. And if she is not interested, you willing to stick around and be reminded of that every day? I will deal with it if it happens, but I am done running." Dalton picked up the badge and turned it over in his hands. "You could do both, you know, court the girl and keep the badge. Plenty of lawmen have wives. Not me. If I am going to do this, I am going to do it right. Give her my full attention, not leave her wondering if I am going to come home in a pine box every time I ride out." The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right then. I accept your resignation, though I am not happy about it. You know anything about carpentry? Ben Howard is looking for help at his furniture shop. Does not pay as well as deputy work, but it is steady and safe. I can swing a hammer without hitting my thumb most days. I will talk to him." That afternoon, Ethan walked to the Morrison house with equal parts excitement and trepidation churning in his gut. He had made a big decision, changed the entire direction of his life, and he had not even talked to Josephine about it first. For all he knew, she saw him as nothing more than the man who had saved her life, someone she was friendly with out of gratitude. The thought made him want to turn around and forget the whole thing, but he forced himself to keep walking. Martha let him in with her usual warm smile. "She is in the sitting room today. Doctor said she could start moving around a bit as long as she keeps her weight off those feet." He found Josephine on the couch, her bandaged feet propped on a cushioned stool, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered and smiled, and his heart did something complicated in his chest. "You are early today," she said. "I was not expecting you until this evening. I had some news I wanted to share." He sat in the chair across from her, suddenly unsure how to begin. She closed her book, giving him her full attention. "Good news or bad news? That depends on how you look at it. I resigned as deputy today." Her eyes widened. "What? Why?" He had practiced this conversation in his head a dozen times on the walk over, but now that he was here, all his carefully chosen words evaporated. "Because I want to stay in Raton, permanently, And I cannot do that while chasing outlaws across the territory. I do not understand. This is your job, your life. It was my life. But I am tired of drifting, Josephine, tired of being alone. I want to put down roots, build something that matters. And I cannot do that if I am gone half the year tracking bad men. She stared at him, and he could not read her expression. This is because of me. Yes. Ethan, you cannot throw away your career for me. We barely know each other. I know enough. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. I know you are brave and strong and smart. I know you make me laugh. I know that talking to you is the best part of my day, and I spend every minute between visits thinking about what I am going to say next. I know that for the first time in 7 years, I want to stay somewhere, and that somewhere is wherever you are. She looked away, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. My life is a disaster. I have nothing to offer you. I am not asking you to offer me anything. I am just asking if maybe, possibly, you might feel something for me too, because if you do, I would like to see where this goes. And if you do not, I will respect that and leave you alone. But either way, I am staying in Raton. Ben Howard is hiring at his furniture shop, and I start next week. You are serious. You are actually giving up being a deputy to make furniture. I am giving up being a deputy to make a life. The furniture is just how I will pay for it. She finally looked back at him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. I lost everyone I loved 2 weeks ago. Everyone. And I am terrified of caring about someone again, because what if I lose you too? What if something happens and I am alone again? He moved to sit beside her on the couch, taking her hand carefully. I cannot promise nothing will happen. Life does not work that way, but I can promise I am not going anywhere dangerous. I am not chasing outlaws or getting into gunfights. I am going to make chairs and tables and maybe a nice cabinet or two. The most dangerous thing I will face is splinters. She laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. This is insane. Maybe. But I have spent 7 years being sensible and careful and alone. Maybe it is time I tried something insane. She looked down at their joined hands, her thumb tracing over his knuckles. I do feel something for you. I have for days. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, that I was confusing being rescued with actual feelings. But then you would walk in and I would forget about everything else, and I knew it was more than that. So where do we go from here? I do not know. I have never done this before. She looked up at him, vulnerability written across her face. I have never courted anyone. My father was very protective, and in St. Louis there were so many rules about proper behavior. But out here, everything is different. I do not know what I am supposed to do. How about we figure it out together? He squeezed her hand gently. No rules, no expectations. Just you and me, taking it one day at a time. I would like that, she said softly. He stayed for another hour and they talked like always, but everything felt different now, charged with possibility. When he finally left, she caught his hand and pulled him back for just a moment. Ethan. Yeah. Thank you for finding me, for saving me, for staying. Thank you for being worth staying for. Over the next month, Ethan settled into his new life with surprising ease. Working at Ben Howard's furniture shop turned out to be satisfying in ways deputy work had never been. There was something deeply rewarding about creating things instead of destroying them, about watching a piece of wood transform into something useful and beautiful. Ben was a patient teacher, and Ethan discovered he had a knack for the detail work, the careful shaping and fitting that turned lumber into furniture. The pay was less than half what he had made as a deputy, but it was enough to rent a small house on the edge of town and still have money left over. He furnished it slowly, making pieces himself in the shop after hours, and took pride in every chair and table he built with his own hands. Josephine's feet healed slowly but steadily. By the end of the third week, she could walk short distances without the cane Doc Morrison had given her. And by the end of the month, she was moving almost normally, though she still had scars that would last the rest of her life. The Morrisons had welcomed her into their home like a daughter, but Ethan knew she would not want to impose on their hospitality forever. They spent every evening together, walking through town as her strength returned, talking about everything under the sun. He learned that she had a passion for cooking and had been planning to help her mother run the Mercantile's restaurant. She learned that he had taught himself to read at 22 and was still self-conscious about his spelling. He showed her the house he had rented, and she helped him arrange the furniture he was making. She told him about her dreams of opening her own restaurant someday, and he told her about the land he wanted to buy, maybe raise some horses. They did not rush things, both of them aware that their feelings had grown in a hothouse of trauma and rescue, wanting to make sure what they felt was real and lasting. But as the weeks passed, Ethan became more certain that what he felt for Josephine was not going away. If anything, it grew stronger every day. He loved the way she laughed, throwing her whole body into it. He loved how she argued with him about books and politics, never backing down even when he disagreed. He loved the way she fit under his arm when they walked, the way she hummed when she was happy, the way she looked at him like he had hung the moon and stars just for her. 2 months after he found her in the desert, he took her to the restaurant in the hotel, the nicest place in Raton, and ordered them both steak dinners that cost more than he made in a day. She wore a dress Martha had altered for her, simple but pretty, and had pinned up her hair in a way that made her look elegant and mature. He wore his only suit, brushed free of sawdust, and tried not to feel too nervous about what he was planning. They ate slowly, savoring the food and the company, and he told her about a big commission Ben had gotten for a wealthy family in Santa Fe, 12 chairs and a dining table that would keep them busy for months. She told him about a letter she had received from her aunt in St. Louis, her father's sister, who had sent money and an invitation to come live with her. "Are you going to go?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "No," she said firmly. "My life is here now. I do not want to go back to St. Louis and pretend to be someone I am not anymore. That Josephine died in the desert, I am different now. How so? Stronger, clearer about what I want, less willing to let other people tell me how to live." She looked at him across the table, her green eyes serious. "I know what I want, Ethan. Do you?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. It was nothing fancy, just plain wood he had shaped and polished himself, but when he opened it, the ring inside caught the lamplight. He had made it from silver wire, bending and twisting it into an intricate pattern that had taken him 3 days to get right. "I want you," he said simply. "I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you. I know it has only been 2 months, and maybe that is not enough time to be sure, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me?" She stared at the ring, then at him, and for a terrible moment he thought she was going to say no. But then she was nodding, tears streaming down her face and reaching for his hand across the table. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly because he had measured her finger while she slept one afternoon, using a piece of string. She laughed when she realized how well it fit, and he grinned back at her, feeling lighter than he had in years. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with the Morrisons and Ben Howard and Sheriff Dalton standing as witnesses. Josephine wore a dress she had sewn herself, white cotton with lace at the collar that Martha had contributed from her own wedding dress. Ethan wore his suit again, and tried not to shake when the preacher asked if he took this woman to be his wife. "I do," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They moved into the little house on the edge of town, and Ethan carried her over the threshold even though she protested she could walk just fine now. That first night as husband and wife, they lay in bed together, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her, and talked about the future. "I want to open that restaurant," she said. "Not right away, but someday. A real nice place where people can get a good meal." "Then we will make it happen," he promised. "Maybe in a year or two, once we have saved up enough money. And I want children, at least 3. 3 sounds good, though maybe we should start with 1 and see how it goes." She laughed and kissed his chest. "Fair enough. What do you want?" "This," he said honestly. "You, a home, a life that matters. Maybe some land eventually, a few horses, but mostly just you. You are too easy to please." "I spent 7 years not being pleased by anything. I am making up for lost time." They built their life together slowly and carefully. 2 people who had both lost everything learning how to build something new. Ethan continued working at the furniture shop, and his skill grew until customers were specifically requesting pieces made by him. Josephine took a job at the boarding house kitchen, cooking meals for the residents, and saved every penny she earned toward her dream restaurant. They fought sometimes, because all couples did, usually about stupid things like whose turn it was to fetch water or whether they could afford new curtains. But they always made up before bed, neither one willing to let anger fester after seeing how quickly life could be stolen away. The first winter in Raton was hard, with snow piling up outside their small house and the wind howling through every crack. But they stayed warm together, wrapped in quilts by the fire, playing cards and reading books aloud and learning every detail of each other's bodies and hearts. Spring brought new growth and new possibilities. Ethan bought a piece of land just outside town, 5 acres with a creek running through it, and started planning the house he would build there. Josephine discovered she was pregnant in April, and they both cried with joy and terror at the news. Their son was born in January of 1882, a healthy baby boy they named Samuel, after Ethan's father. He had Josephine's green eyes and Ethan's dark hair, and screamed like his lungs would burst every time he was hungry. They took turns walking him at night, exhausted but happy, marveling at the tiny life they had created together. When Samuel was 6 months old, they finally had enough money saved to buy the old bakery building on Main Street. It needed work, but Ethan spent his evenings and weekends fixing it up, replacing rotten boards and building new tables and chairs. Josephine planned the menu, tested recipes, and convinced Martha Morrison to invest as a silent partner. They opened Josephine's restaurant in November of 1882, and it was an immediate success. Her cooking, learned from her mother and refined through practice, drew customers from all over Raton and beyond. She made the best chicken and dumplings in the territory, according to Sheriff Dalton, and her apple pie could make grown men weep. Ethan helped when he could, waiting tables and washing dishes, and hired a young woman named Lucy to help with the lunch rush. Life was good, better than either of them had imagined possible. They worked hard, raised their son, and fell more in love with each passing day. In the evenings, after Samuel was in bed and the restaurant was closed, they would sit on the porch of their little house and watch the sun set over the mountains, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, exactly as they had been on their wedding night. "Do you ever think about that day in the desert?" she asked him one evening, 2 years into their marriage. "Sometimes. Do you?" "Every time I look at my feet." She wiggled her bare toes, showing the scars that still mark them, "but I do not regret it. If I had not walked, if you had not found me, none of this would have happened. Do you think we would have met anyway? If things had been different," she considered the question seriously. "Maybe, probably not." My family would have opened their mercantile, and I would have worked there, and you would have kept drifting from town to town. We might have passed each other on the street and never spoken. Then I am glad things happened the way they did. Terrible as it was, it brought us together. That is a dark way to look at finding your soulmate. Maybe. But I have learned that life is not simple or fair or easy. Good things and bad things are all tangled up together, and you cannot have one without the other. She tilted her head to look up at him. When did you get so philosophical? When I married a woman too smart for me. I have to work hard to keep up. She poked him in the ribs, and he caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the house, Samuel stirred and whimpered in his sleep, then settled. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust, the eternal scent of New Mexico. "I love you," Josephine said quietly. "I know I tell you every day, but I want to make sure you know. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Ethan replied. "I just did not know I needed saving until I found you." Their second child, a daughter named Clara after Josephine's sister, was born in 1884. She was smaller than Samuel had been, with a shock of dark curls and her father's serious expression. Samuel, now 2, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, which mostly meant getting in the way while Josephine tried to nurse or change diapers. The restaurant continued to thrive, allowing them to hire more help and expand the menu. Josephine's dream of running her own successful business had become reality, and she took fierce pride in what she had built. Ethan had moved from Ben Howard's shop to working full-time on their land, building the house he had been planning for years. It was slow going, doing all the work himself, but he did not mind. Every board he placed, every nail he hammered, was an investment in their future. In 1885, they finally moved into the new house. It was not fancy, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and warm and entirely theirs. Samuel had his own bedroom for the first time, and Clara slept in a crib Ethan had made from cherry wood, with horses carved into the headboard. They hosted their first dinner party in the new house that spring, inviting the Morrisons and Sheriff Dalton and Ben Howard and his wife. Martha insisted on bringing dessert, and they all crowded around Ethan's handmade dining table, eating Josephine's pot roast and telling stories late into the night. Samuel entertained everyone by reciting the alphabet, which he had just learned, and Clara toddled around showing off her new walking skills. Ethan looked around the table at the people who had become his family, listened to Josephine's laughter as Martha told an embarrassing story about him, and felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. This was what he had been missing all those years on the trail, this sense of belonging and connection. He caught Josephine's eye across the table, and she smiled at him, that special smile she saved just for him, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. After everyone left and the children were in bed, they cleaned up together, washing dishes and wiping down the table in companionable silence. When they finally made it to their own bed, exhausted but happy, Josephine curled into his side like always. "Today was perfect," she said. "Yeah, it was. I want to have more nights like this. Fill this house with friends and family and noise. We can do that." He kissed the top of her head. "We can do whatever you want." "I want one more baby, maybe 2, he laughed. "You just said you want the house full of noise. That will definitely do it." "So you agree?" "I agree to anything that makes you happy." Their third child, another boy they named Ethan Jr. but called EJ, was born in 1886. He was the biggest of the 3, with a lusty cry and an appetite that kept Josephine constantly nursing. Samuel was now 4 and Clara 2, and the house was indeed full of noise and chaos and constant motion. Ethan built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms because Josephine insisted the children needed their own space as they got older. The restaurant had become so successful that Josephine needed to be there less and less. She had trained her staff well, and Lucy had become the manager, handling most of the day-to-day operations. This allowed Josephine to spend more time with the children, which she preferred, though she still went in 3 times a week to cook and oversee the menu. In 1888, when Samuel was 6, Clara 4, and EJ 2, Josephine surprised Ethan by announcing she was pregnant again. They had talked about having 4 children, but life had been so hectic with 3 that they had not actively tried for another. But surprises were part of life, and they welcomed this one with open arms. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Sarah after Ethan's first love, was born in early 1889. Josephine had insisted on the name, saying that Sarah deserved to be remembered and honored, and Ethan loved her even more for the generosity of spirit that gesture required. Baby Sarah was tiny and quiet, the opposite of her boisterous siblings, and seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. With 4 children, life became a beautiful chaos of meals and laundry and bedtime stories and scraped knees. Ethan expanded his horse breeding operation, buying mares and a good stallion, and started selling horses to ranchers throughout the territory. The money was good, supplementing what they made from the restaurant, and allowed them to save for the children's futures. Samuel started school in 1888, walking to the schoolhouse in town every morning with his lunch pail and slate. He was a serious student, always bringing home books to read, and Josephine predicted he would be a lawyer or doctor someday. Clara was more adventurous, always climbing trees and chasing after her father while he worked with the horses. EJ was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile and a hug. And baby Sarah was simply content, happy to sit and watch her siblings play. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. First days of school and lost teeth and Christmas mornings, filled with simple wooden toys Ethan made in his workshop. The restaurant celebrated its 10th anniversary in 1892, and they threw a party for the whole town, serving free meals all day and dancing in the street until midnight. Josephine, now 33, was more beautiful than ever, her face marked with smile lines and the wisdom that came from building a life from nothing. Ethan was 41, his hair starting to show gray at the temples, his hands calloused from years of carpentry and ranching. He had put on some weight from Josephine's cooking, and she teased him about needing to let out his pants. But he was healthy and strong and happier than he had ever imagined possible. In 1893, Samuel turned 11 and asked if he could learn to work with the horses. Ethan taught him carefully, showing him how to approach the animals, how to read their body language, how to gentle them with patience rather than force. The boy had a natural talent, and by the end of summer he could saddle and ride as well as his father. Clara, now 9, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a chef like her mother. She started helping in the restaurant kitchen after school, learning to knead bread and chop vegetables and follow recipes. Josephine was thrilled, seeing a way to eventually pass on the business she had built. EJ and Sarah were still young, 7 and 4, focused mostly on playing and learning their letters. But they were growing fast, changing every day, and Ethan found himself wishing he could slow time down, keep them small and dependent just a little longer. One evening in the fall of 1893, after all the children were in bed, Ethan and Josephine sat on the porch as they had 1,000 times before. The air was cooling, carrying the first hint of winter, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to the moon. "You ever miss it?" Josephine asked suddenly. "Being a deputy, I mean. The adventure, the excitement." Ethan thought about it seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. You track the bad guy, you bring him in, justice is served. Everything clear and straightforward. But no, I do not miss the life. I do not miss being alone, wondering if today is the day I get shot. I do not miss the violence and the death and the endless moving from place to place. No regrets about giving it up, not a single one." He pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "Why do you ask? I just want to make sure you are happy, that you do not feel trapped by all this." She gestured at the house, the barn, the land around them. "Trapped. Josephine, you gave me a life worth living. A family, a home, a reason to get up every morning beyond just surviving another day. How could I possibly feel trapped by that?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about that girl in the desert, walking barefoot toward a death she was certain would come. I think about how different my life would be if you had not found me. And I get scared that maybe I am not enough, that you gave up too much for me." He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "Listen to me. You are everything. That girl in the desert was brave and strong, but you, the woman you became, are even more remarkable. You built a successful business, raised 4 incredible children, made a home that people dream about. You are not someone I settled for. You are someone I won the lottery with." Tears shone in her eyes. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. Always have, always will." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss of comfort and promise and enduring affection. When they pulled apart, she was smiling, the worry erased from her face. "Come on," she said, standing and pulling him up. "Let us go check on the children one more time before bed." They walked through the house together, looking in on each sleeping child. Samuel sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling over the side. Clara curled up with her favorite doll clutched tight. EJ on his stomach, blankets kicked off despite the cool air. And Sarah in her crib, thumb in her mouth, peaceful and perfect. "We did good," Josephine whispered as they stood in Sarah's doorway. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "We did real good." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel became a skilled horseman and took over much of the breeding operation by the time he was 15, giving Ethan more time to focus on building furniture again. He had missed the craft and found deep satisfaction in returning to it, now that he did not need the income as desperately. Clara opened her own bakery when she was 18, using money she had saved from working at the restaurant and a loan from her parents. It became hugely popular, and soon people were coming from as far as Santa Fe for her cinnamon rolls and sourdough bread. EJ surprised everyone by becoming interested in law, inspired by watching Sheriff Dalton work cases. He apprenticed with a lawyer in Raton and dreamed of going to law school in Denver someday. Ethan and Josephine saved carefully to make that dream possible. Sarah, their quiet youngest child, turned out to have a gift for music. She learned to play the piano at the church and later the violin, and her playing could bring tears to people's eyes. She performed at town gatherings and church services, and Josephine often said she was the soul of the family, expressing in music what the rest of them could not find words for. In 1900, Ethan turned 49 and Josephine turned 41. They had been married for 18 years, together for 19, and their love had only deepened with time. They renewed their vows that year on their anniversary, surrounded by their children and friends, promising again to love and honor each other for however many years God gave them. Samuel married a local rancher's daughter named Mary in 1901, and they moved into a small house on Ethan and Josephine's land. Their first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas, was born in 1902, and Ethan held his grandson with shaking hands, marveling at the continuation of the family line. Clara married the following year to a fellow chef she had met at a cooking competition in Denver. They settled in Raton and opened a second restaurant, partnering with Josephine to expand the family business. EJ went off to law school in 1903, writing letters home every week about his studies and the city and how much he missed New Mexico. Sarah, at 14, was still too young for courting, though several boys had already started showing interest. Ethan informed them all that they would have to wait until she was at least 16, and even then, they would need to pass his inspection first. Josephine rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness, but secretly she was glad that their baby would stay their baby just a little longer. In 1905, 24 years after Ethan found Josephine in the desert, they sat together on the same porch, watching the sunset over land they owned and had built into something meaningful. Their hair was graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and many years, but their hands were still clasped together, fingers intertwined. "You remember that first night?" Josephine asked. "When you found me, every detail. You looked half dead but too stubborn to admit it. I remember thinking you were a mirage, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. Still think that, actually." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have built something good here, have we not? The best. 4 children, all happy and healthy and making their own ways in the world. A business that thrives, land that provides, and each other still after all these years. I never imagined I could be this happy. After that day in the desert, after losing everyone, I thought my life was over. But it was just beginning. Mine too. I was just too stupid to know it at the time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The land around them was green with summer growth, and horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. From inside the house came the sound of Sarah practicing her violin, the notes floating out into the evening air like prayers. "You gave me boots and water," Josephine said softly, "and I gave you a reason to stop running. Best trade I ever made. Me too." As the stars began to appear, one by one lighting up the vast New Mexico sky, they remained on the porch, holding hands and counting their blessings. They had traveled a long road from that terrible day in the desert, had built a life from ashes and determination and love that refused to quit. Josephine's feet still bore the scars from her barefoot journey, marks she carried with pride because they reminded her of how far she had come. Ethan still had his old deputy's badge in a drawer, kept not for nostalgia, but as a reminder of the path he had walked away from to build something better. They were not perfect people. They had fought and failed and made mistakes along the way. But they had built something real and lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would carry on, and their children's children, all because a woman refused to die in the desert, and a man chose to stop running long enough to fall in love. As they finally stood to go inside for the night, Ethan paused and pulled Josephine into his arms one more time, holding her close and feeling her heart beat against his chest. It was a heart that had survived terrible loss, that had learned to love again, that had never given up even when giving up would have been easier. "Thank you," he said into her hair, "for walking across that desert, for surviving, for giving me the greatest gift of my life." "What gift is that?" "You, us, all of this, everything." She pulled back to look at him, her green eyes still as bright and clear as the day he found her. "We saved each other, Ethan. That is how it works when it is real love. We both get saved." He kissed her then, soft and slow. a kiss that held 24 years of love and commitment and devotion. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, and they walked into their home hand in hand, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The years continued to unfold with grace and love. EJ returned from law school in 1906 and opened a practice in Raton, defending the poor and fighting for justice in a way that made his father proud. He married a schoolteacher named Ruth in 1907, and they had 3 children in quick succession, adding more noise and joy to family gatherings. Sarah married a musician from Denver in 1908, when she was 22, and they toured the western states performing concerts. She always came home to Raton between tours, and her music filled the house with beauty and light. Josephine's restaurant celebrated its 25th anniversary in 1907 and was now run entirely by Clara and her husband, with Josephine serving as a consultant and occasional special guest chef. She spent most of her time now with her grandchildren, passing on recipes and stories, and the wisdom she had accumulated over a lifetime of building something from nothing. Ethan, now 56, had officially retired from horse breeding and spent his days in his workshop, making furniture that was sought after throughout the territory. His pieces were known for their quality and craftsmanship, and he took pride in knowing that something he created with his own hands would be used and appreciated for generations. In 1910, on a warm spring evening much like the one where they had sat together so many times before, Ethan and Josephine celebrated their 29th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the big house, now expanded to accommodate family gatherings, and they shared a meal that Josephine and Clara had prepared together. After dinner, Samuel stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast to the best parents anyone could ask for. Ma, you taught us strength and determination, and that anything is possible if you are willing to work for it. Pa, you taught us integrity and kindness, and that the measure of a man is how he treats the people he loves." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You both taught us what real love looks like, and that is the greatest gift any parent can give their children." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and Ethan felt his eyes sting with tears. He looked at Josephine beside him, her hand in his as always, and saw that she was crying too. But they were happy tears, tears of gratitude for a life well lived and love that had lasted. "Thank you," Josephine said when she could speak again. "All of you. For being exactly who you are, for making us proud every single day, for building your own lives with the same determination your father and I tried to model. We could not ask for better children or grandchildren." "Hear, hear," Ethan added, his voice rough. "Now who wants pie?" "Because your mother made 3 kinds, and they are not going to eat themselves." Laughter filled the room, and the evening continued with dessert and stories and children running around while adults tried unsuccessfully to contain them. It was chaos and noise and everything wonderful about family, and Ethan and Josephine sat in the middle of it all, holding hands and smiling at the beautiful mess they had created. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Sarah sat at the piano and played a piece she had composed herself. She called it Desert Rose and dedicated it to her mother. The music was haunting and beautiful, starting slow and mournful, before building to a triumphant crescendo that spoke of survival and hope and love that overcomes all obstacles. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. Josephine stood and went to her youngest daughter, pulling her into a fierce hug. "That was beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." "I wanted to capture your story," Sarah said. "The story of how you and Pa found each other. It needed to be remembered in music as well as words." "You succeeded," Ethan said, standing to join them. He wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, holding them close. That was absolutely perfect. After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Ethan and Josephine prepared for bed in the room they had shared for nearly 3 decades. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of long familiarity, not needing words to communicate. When they finally lay in bed, Josephine curled into Ethan's side exactly as she had on their wedding night all those years ago. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close, and they lay in comfortable silence for a while. "I have been thinking," Josephine said eventually. "About what? About time. How much of it we have left, I mean. We are not young anymore, Ethan. I am 51, you are 59. We probably have maybe 20 years left if we are lucky." "That is a grim thing to think about on our anniversary." "No, not grim, just realistic. And I want to make sure we use whatever time we have left well. No regrets, no wishing we had done things differently." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Do you have regrets? Things you wish we had done?" "No, not a single one. Every choice we made led us here, to this life, to these children, to this moment. I would not change anything." "Me neither." "Well, maybe I would have found you a day earlier, saved you some walking." She laughed softly. "If you had found me earlier, I might not have been desperate enough to trust you. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. So what do we do with our remaining years?" "This. Exactly this. Spend time with our family, watch our grandchildren grow, keep loving each other every single day. That is all I want." "Sounds perfect to me." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and peaceful. Two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other and built a legacy that would last long after they were gone. The years flowed on like water, bringing changes both joyful and sorrowful. Ethan's old friend Sheriff Dalton passed away in 1912, and Ethan served as a pallbearer, mourning the man who had given him his first badge and later accepted his resignation without judgment. Doc and Martha Morrison both passed within months of each other in 1914, and Josephine grieved for the couple who had taken her in and treated her like family when she had nothing. But there were joys, too. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren. Samuel's son Thomas grew up strong and capable, taking over the horse breeding business when Samuel began to slow down. Clara's bakery expanded to 3 locations, becoming a regional success. E.J. became a respected lawyer and judge, known for his fairness and integrity. And Sarah's music was performed in concert halls across the West, bringing beauty to thousands of lives. In 1916, Ethan and Josephine celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them, sitting on the porch they had sat on hundreds of times before. Ethan was 65 now, his hair completely gray, his body showing the aches and pains of a life well lived. Josephine was 57, her hair more silver than brown, her hands marked with the years of hard work. But they were still together, still in love, still grateful for every day they had been given. 35 years, Josephine said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Ethan agreed. That is how time works when you are happy. You think we will make it to 40? I sure plan to try. Got to stick around to see all those grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow up. We have built something good, have we not? The best. Better than I ever dreamed possible. She took his hand, her fingers still fitting perfectly between his after all these years. Thank you, Ethan, for finding me, for loving me, for giving me this life. Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on a broken-down deputy who did not know what he was missing. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and neither one felt the need to say anything more. Everything that needed to be said had been said over 3.5 decades of shared life. They had walked through fire together, built dreams from ashes, and created a family that would carry on their legacy of love and determination. As the stars began to appear, Josephine thought back to that day in the desert, her feet bleeding and her body nearly broken, when she had seen a figure on horseback and thought she was hallucinating. She thought about the cool water on her lips, the boots that were too big but still perfect, the gentle hands that had bandaged her feet and carried her to safety. She thought about the man who had given up his career to stay with her, who had loved her through grief and healing, who had built a home and a family and a life that was more wonderful than any dream. And she squeezed his hand, feeling his answering squeeze, a silent communication of love that needed no words. Ethan thought about the moment he had crested that rise and seen her collapsed on the sand, how his heart had dropped with fear that he was too late. He thought about her green eyes opening, looking at him with hope and trust, despite having every reason to trust no one. He thought about the way his life had changed in that instant, how everything that mattered had begun with her. He thought about walking away from the badge, from the violence and the drifting and the loneliness. He thought about learning to build furniture, about becoming a father and grandfather, about waking up every morning next to the woman he loved. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that giving her his boots and water had been the best decision he had ever made, because she had given him everything in return. They sat until the stars filled the sky, two old lovers holding hands and counting their blessings, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. And when they finally went inside for the night, they did so hand in hand, still together after all these years, still in love, still exactly where they were meant to be. Their story, which had begun in the brutal heat of the desert with bare feet and desperate hope, had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. It would be told and retold by their children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of love and determination, and two souls finding exactly what they needed in each other. And though neither of them knew exactly how many years they had left, they knew this. Whatever time remained, they would spend it together, still holding hands, still grateful, still deeply and completely in love. Because that was what real love looked like, not perfect, not always easy, but enduring and true and worth every step of the journey, even the ones that hurt. The desert had tested them both in different ways, and they had emerged stronger and more certain of what mattered. Ethan had found his purpose in loving and protecting one woman instead of chasing justice for strangers. Josephine had found that losing everything could lead to gaining something even better. And together, they had built a legacy that would outlast them both, a family rooted in love and strengthened by the knowledge that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best. As they lay in bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 35 years, they both silently thanked the desert for bringing them together, thanked fate for putting Ethan on that particular trail on that particular day, and thanked God for the gift of each other. And they slept peacefully, two souls that had found their home in each other's hearts, exactly where they belonged.